And Bakhmut holds.
Still?
No, it's fallen.
Are you sure?
No. Yes, I am. But if you're at all just consuming passively Western media, no, nothing's changed from yesterday to today. It's all the same. Yeah. No, after 200 plus days, it's over. For the capture of this city, it's over. I guess that's the end of the name Bakhmut, at least for the Russians. They're probably going to revert to its old Soviet name of Artemovsk. I don't know. Where do you start? I mean, a bunch of convicts with shovels apparently defeated.
Shovels.
Multi-billion-dollar, NATO-backed, Western Merc-backed, NATO-trained army.
Doesn't
capture of a city.
Yeah, it doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't look good at all.
But then,
how many died? Jesus Christ, the numbers have thrown around. Obviously, the numbers are inflated depending on which side you're. Well, not necessarily. Obviously, there's so many different numbers. You can't be sure of anything, right? But I think anyone following this closely can agree that it's like a lot of dead bodies, not just in the city, but in the area. Because remember, the whole area is a complex of towns of varying sizes. There was Solidar that came just before this, which was a battle in its own right. Countless numbers of Ukrainians for sure are gone.
Well, specifically in Bakhmut, it was the official numbers, I think, released by the MOD or...
Which? Russian?
Yeah. There's, that, they claim, obviously, you can just have a look at them here. A big long list of defeated brigades, at least, as in to the extent that they, whatever number of personnel within those brigades they fielded. Obviously, it's 1 year since the fall of the capture of Mariupol officially started. This campaign for Bakhmut started in October, so you're talking 7-8 months. Killed in action 39,000 Ukrainians, and of that actually killed 23,000. And then armored vehicle losses. They put it in dollars, so 7.8 billion worth of armored vehicle losses, and then drones 2,700, and plane losses 23 planes. So the official numbers of, it works out at 100 killed a day over the number of days, about 100, a little more than 100 a day. The Ukrainians killed, and almost double that for losses, overall losses, including injuries. So 200 a day for every day of a 224 day battle is pretty catastrophic. But apparently there's no shortage of people to throw at, because they're defenders. You see, it's not about they're defending. Which psychologically, you can see that in this. I mean, obviously there's a power imbalance in the sense of the effectiveness of the Russian military compared to the Ukrainian military is significantly greater. So you're going to have much more Ukrainians killed than Russians, but also it's the sense of that dynamic between invader and defender. If depending on the type of invader, but since the Russians are taking a cautious approach and want to minimize their losses, and also they have that advantage that I spoke of, whereas the Ukrainians as defenders get full of patriotic fervor and are driven.
If we don't take a stand here, where do we?
It's emotionally driven, they'll be more likely to sacrifice themselves and become martyrs. You know what I mean? That's much more a thing on the side of the defender in any conflict.
Yeah,
who perceive themselves as being, being subject to an evil aggressor. You're much more willing to fight and die for that cause than, let's say, in theory, the aggressor would, because they're doing it for other reasons. They just don't have that defense mindset.
Yeah,
we're defending our country. Although the Russians obviously do, as part of their propaganda, they do put that out there that they're defending Russia, but it's not as poignant, let's say, for the Russians, because they're not in their own country, not actually defending their own land. They're defending other people, ethnic Russians in another land. But the Ukrainians, at least those that are willing to step up and, go and and fight, they see it as defending their territory. It's on their territory. So it's not unsurprising that there would be significantly more Russian or Ukrainian losses overall in this conflict, even setting aside the technical advantage and numerical advantages that the Russians have. Not numerical, but military advantage that the Russians have.
Artillery and air support.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it's been a year. It's a year to the day. Isn't that crazy? Since
Mariupol. Yeah.
Mariupol was, as far as the Russians were concerned, officially defeated. Probably the end of the Azovstal plant.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems a bit contrived to me. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's on exactly the same day. I mean, really? You think it's a coincidence? Huh?
Right, yeah, I know. It stands out. It does stand out. Yeah, I agree. It stands out. It's also May 20th is the date of, maybe that's not connected, Zelensky's inauguration in May 20th of 2020.
Yeah. So even more so, that convergence of coincidental dates says to me that it was planned that way,
by the Russians.
Yeah.
Which speaks to them doing this in their own good time. All the screamers be damned.
It speaks to a level of control over the situation as well that this isn't being admitted. It doesn't.
Yeah.
That when that is that kind of ridicules the obvious propaganda. The Russians fighting the shovels. Russia's losing. Russia's terrible. Russia's a terrible army. There's so much. This conflict, more so than any other conflict even in all of the 20th century, is just the fog of war doesn't get it. Like,
no,
I mean,
they're like smoke machines, just constantly pumping out.
It's the first major conflict in the information age, and where the information technology has been massively applied to it. I mean, obviously, that kind of the availability of the spread of the internet and usage of internet and availability of cell phones and all that kind of stuff and different applications on the internet and like I said, the number of people using them has increased, like say since the Iraq war or even the war in Syria and stuff. But
the Iraq war would have been so different if ordinary Iraqis had been able to capture it on their phone and then upload it directly to the net.
Exactly, yeah. So that's what makes a big difference, and that just creates a situation where you have just a massive amount of lies. But there's also the investment of Western powers, because they're so invested in this conflict and are seeing it as there was no reference ever to Iraq being a war for our freedom, for our future.
The world order will collapse if we don't win this.
It's not. None of those previous wars were existential. They're from the West point of view, at least as they're claiming, which means that their investment in it and the level of propaganda and lies is through the roof, to the point where they're all on board. The Western media and governments are all fully on board, like without any question, fully on board with the idea that you must lie. We have to lie. We're actually helping the war effort. We're helping Western democracy survive. We're helping the international rules-based order survive by actively lying about what's going on.
Yeah. It's for the greater good.
So people's idea of transparency in media or honesty in media and truth-telling in media, sorry, that was last century, or that was
and there have been admissions
early
to that effect.
Have there?
There have, a bit like we saw with the pandemic. Along the way, there was the occasional article that, yes, this is being inflated, but we have to. It's part of
it's good.
It's for this. Yeah, we have to make sure people are on board with this. They don't understand what's at stake, so we do, of course. We watched in real time yesterday evening as Western media floundered with how to deal with reporting on this, and of course it was just put up. We know that the BBC said, "Well, Russia claims." So how are they faring? Zelensky, of course, is in Japan at this time. On his world tour, his never-ending world tour. Here's a clip of him. He's sitting down with Biden, and he's asked, and he answers in English about Bakhmut. He seems to admit, yes, Bakhmut is gone, but it's unclear.
Mr. President, President Zelensky's Bakhmut still in Ukraine's hands? The Russians say they've taken Bakhmut.
I think no. But you have
Okay.
to understand that there is nothing. They destroyed everything. There are no buildings. It's a pity. It's tragedy. But for today, Bakhmut is only in our hearts. There is nothing on this place. So just ground and a lot of dead Russians. But they came to us. So that our defenders in Bakhmut, they did strong work. And of course we appreciate them for their great job.
So is that a yes or no?
The guy asked him, Bakhmut is Bakhmut still in Ukrainian hand? The Russian says they have taken Bakhmut,
Yeah.
and he says no.
I-
What's he saying no to?
I think no. And
Yeah,
then he
he's-
says, anyway, Bakhmut is in our hearts. Come on. That means it's gone. It's a tragedy, but
It's the ghost of Bakhmut.
it's
is in our heart.
occupied, yes, by Russians, but Russian corpses.
Yeah, only Russian.
I'll still get a victory out of this. That's what he did on the spot, in credit he put on the spot. So here's a prepared statement today from either from him directly or from his office. This is how Sky News reported this. Bakhmut is, quote, not occupied. Zelensky denies claim Russia has taken control of Ukrainian city. Okay. Oh my God, look at that byline. So remember, he's in Hiroshima, Japan, for the G7, right?
Right.
The devastation in the besieged eastern city, Bakhmut, has been likened by Zelensky to that inflicted on Hiroshima following the dropping of the atomic bomb in 1945. Okay, scroll down a bit. Okay, so his counterclaim is no. He said Ukrainian troops remained in the besieged eastern city. I mean, I was Biden next to him when he said that?
Mm.
That Bakhmut is Hiroshima, 1945. Mother of God. But again, he emphasized there's nothing left. They've destroyed everything. So, yeah, that's kind of like, yes, they have, but it's nothing. It's nothing to us.
It's no big deal. Well, that's not what he said. Like about 5 months ago, you can sit here speaking. He only went to for the first time, I think, to the US during this conflict and spoke in front of Congress. And here's what he said then about Bakhmut. On the left.
Americans. Yesterday, before coming here to Washington, D.C., I was at the front line in our Bakhmut, in our stronghold in the east of Ukraine, in the
Our
Donbass.
stronghold.
The Russian military and mercenaries have been attacking Bakhmut non-stop since May. They have been attacking it day and night, but Bakhmut stands.
Yes, that's what we like to hear in Congress. Some jingoism and rhetoric. Clap, clap, clap. What's go to the right one? See what he says.
Bakhmut is not just a stronghold that holds back the Russian army, but for the Russian army to completely pull out, more cannons and shells are needed. If so, just like the Battle of Saratoga, the fight for Bakhmut will change the trajectory of our war for independence and for freedom.
So
So it'll change the trajectory of the war. It's a stronghold, but apparently now it's nothing. It's just a bunch of houses of no significance. So which is it again? Lies, nonsense. Narrative changes depending on how you feel. But it's very much like your Congress is very like your war for independence.
is that the battle he referred to?
Feel in your hearts the same thing.
You are
and
little guy against British Empire. We are little guy against Ruski Empire.
feel in your hearts and then feel in your pockets for the money.
Yeah.
You know, the heart connected to the wallet. You send.
You send everything.
You like me. You send.
So I guess Prigozhin was playing us all for fools then, with all his claims that Wagner was outnumbered and outshelled and all the rest.
Mm.
Especially if your take is correct that this could be, pinpointed to the day for Russians' own PR purposes.
Yeah.
syncing it with the liberation of Mariupol last year.
Look, for at least the past week, there's been a few high-rise buildings left. You know what I mean?
Right. They
Uh,
could have gone earlier. Yeah. Jesus, I know.
But it's not the end, you know.
I know,
obviously.
of course. Well, we'll put this in context in a minute. But remember, these are the people who made Bakhmut. We just heard it from him, but also the Western media. They made Bakhmut an issue. I mean, 2 months ago, if we lose Bakhmut now, they'll be racing across the Dnieper River and they'll be in Kiev by breakfast time, you know? Kind of bullshit. So they made a big deal out of it, right? So this is from the Telegraph, although it's, MSN just republished it. Telegraph headline 18th May, so 3 days ago. Russia-Ukraine war live. Wagner fighters, quote, like rats in a mousetrap. It's like this is, let's just say what our side is facing and just say that's what they're facing. You know, straight up switch of reality.
Well, you know, if you want the reality-based interpretation of this whole thing and why they're lying about it, why they just kind of like talk it up and then play it down and carry on, it's because war is, like I was saying to you earlier on, war's a racket, you know, which was, you know, most famously spelled out by a guy called Smedley Butler. Wrote a book called War's a Racket in 1935. And his basic summary is that war is a racket. It has always been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It is conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many. Out of war, a few people make huge fortunes. Which is, and I've said this before, and it's been my perspective, and I see no reason to change it. Certainly, it was true in 1935 for Smedley Butler that war is an end in itself for a small group of people who profit from it. It's a good idea for those people to simply have a war. It's not about who wins it or you know, if we lose or whatever. That can always be, you know, the data can always be manipulated in one way or another. But ultimately, for you know, when it comes down to it, for a small group of people, it doesn't matter who wins or loses. Having the war is the point.
Yeah.
So when you get downstream of that, and you're talking like we are about the kind of media and how they report on war, I mean, if you're focusing at that level, you're not really understanding. You're missing it all. You're going to miss it all, you know. So, and that's from, particularly in the context of the war in Ukraine, the racket part of it obviously is primarily from Western sources. Basically, it's Western sources, and primarily the US and maybe the UK, who are the racketeers in this conflict. They're the ones who set it up. They're the ones who provoked this war, who knowingly and consciously, deliberately drew Russia into the war, in the knowledge that they probably wouldn't win. They would not be able. They just wanted to give Russia a problem, you know, and that, you know, the dog barks and the caravan moves on eventually, you know, and it's not a end or beginning. So even these, it's not the end of something, the beginning of something else. It's not a big upheaval. There's no serious downsides for them. It'll pass on the news cycle, and something else will come along, and we'll still be in power. So it doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah. Until bigger, like you also told me yesterday, bigger macro forces come into play, and then there really is a point or a period beyond which the West cannot any longer operate as it has done, you know, for short-term pecuniary interests.
Yeah, well, you're dealing with people at the highest level who are actually pushing this conflict and all sorts of other things in society, all sorts of other destructive things, including the way the US is pushing economic sanctions on different people. Most recently, more recently on China and their attitude, you know, their actions towards China. All of it's and the sanctions that they tried to impose on Russia that didn't work. If you look at it very, very quickly, you see that you can see already with the Russia sanctions that it actually doesn't really do anything to stop Russia. It doesn't hurt Russia very much. Hurts Western businesses more than it hurts Russia, and speeds up the decline and the unseating of the West at the top of the seat and the top table, the top seat of the top table in global power structure. It increases or speeds up the timeline of the West basically falling, and they're doing the same thing with China now, where with the sanctions against China is preventing companies, the US imposing sanctions on or threatening to impose penalties or sanctions on companies that sell semiconductor, tech to China to try and screw over China. And they've been doing that for the past few years. The past laws, and they've been imposing that on Western companies, which means that Western companies that sell, Western tech companies that sell semiconductors and similar tech items to China, they can no longer do that. So those companies, and you can look in the media, like Intel and a bunch of other major Western tech companies, have all taken massive hits on their profits over the past couple of years because the US has threatened them and said you can no longer sell to China, which is a massive market for them. And they're saying you can't sell anymore. So these Western companies are kind of taking serious hits to their bottom line, which affects Western economies at large. And and in response to that, China then massively invests in its own domestic semiconductor production, to the point that it doesn't matter to China. And the only loser in this is Western companies. And they've done that with Russia as well. So it's what are these people in the West? What is are they that stupid, or are they just off the leash? Have they lost the plot completely?
I think they think in their delusion that they can create a miniature version of the current global trading systems that excludes Russia and China in some key respects, where we're still on top, at least over maybe it's more geographic thinking. At least over here, the US will be the top of this pile, and we want it to be as big as possible, but we'll have to be realistic that it can no longer be a global project.
So it's a separating
if we can't be hegemon of the whole earth, what can we be hegemon of at minimum?
Right. So it's dividing.
Europe is captured in that respect at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The Anglophone countries, probably Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South America to some extent still, yes. So you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Recreate the world. Okay, we can't beat China on a one-to-one basis. So can we exclude them? And anyone who then tries to trade with them will try and sanction them, which we can do as long as the dollar remains. But you're right, though. There has to be some. They're not dumb. Some of the best thinkers, they're not that stupid. They also know the dollar will decrease in its use as the kind of the grease that makes it all go round, which will undercut even a backup scheme like that, a miniature globalized world, with us still on top of this heap.
Right. So it's a division of the world.
They get caught up in their
delusions.
Yeah.
And they don't see the bigger picture, and they live for the moment in a certain sense. They don't care. They're like, extremely impulsive, hedonistic people who only live in the moment for what is expedient and useful for me to do today. And there's not a lot of
that's why their actions don't match their words. At their think tanks like the WEF, the Atlantic Council and stuff, they produce, or the Heritage Foundation or whoever, they produce the great papers. That's when you read them, it speaks to seeing the world in a global sense and being all-encompassing in its assessment of the problems and the possible solutions. But you see their actions don't match. They're too greedy. They go in for the quick kill. They go and topple a country on paper they've said is very important that we keep this place stable over here. And then they go and they topple the leader. They just undercut what they know would be objectively the right thing to do. Yeah.
There's a sense that somewhere they're aware that it's an end game type thing. That there's and it's almost like a fire sale type thing, and it's get what you can in the moment because this place is going down the tubes. Not that they necessarily know that consciously, but they have a sense that they're kind of reaction machines in a certain sense. They don't think very deeply about a lot of things. They're very impulsive, and they have a sense that this is the scramble for the world type of thing, instead of the scramble for Africa back in the day, but the scramble for the whole world. And it's like it is changing. They recognize that it's changing, and they're willing to, like you were saying, kind of divide the world almost into two hemispheres.
Which is exactly what the UN chief spoke out against, kind of like Macron a couple of months ago. He says the world is dividing into two camps. This is really, really bad. Bad direction.
Yeah, basically east-west.
East-west
more or less,
or west-south.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not. It's really just. It's Western Europe, America, Western Europe, North America. Maybe a little bit Mexico, maybe in the because it's right on the border. Can be kept in the Western camp, and then the rest of the quote unquote international community: Australia, New Zealand, a few other countries that you can fight over. But generally
American
speaking,
Samoa.
Africa, Asia, and most of South America. Well, South America is maybe up for grabs, but Africa and Asia, everywhere east of Western Europe is in that other hemisphere, and let's see what happens.
I think it's encapsulated actually in the big international summits that took place last week, or are still taking place, I think, this weekend. So the G7 we've mentioned, that's basically Europe, USA, Canada, and Japan, of course, host country in this case. The G7. At the same time, Xi Jinping is host of the Central Asia Summit. It's an inaugural format, and it is just a Central Asian stance with China. So you see, that's region focus. Compared to what the West is, it doesn't make sense calling it the West, the Western one, the G7, because you've got Japan in it, then you've got Europe, and then you skip another ocean and you've got North America. What is that as a geographic entity? It makes no sense. Whereas the Chinese one makes sense. It's us and our immediate neighbors in Central Asia.
Right.
At the same time, there was the Arab League summit. They're all contiguous neighbors with each other. They're distinct geographically and, of course, ethnically and religiously, because the Arabs, those things make sense. The G7 one no longer makes any sense.
Yeah.
Japan plus Western Europe plus skip an ocean, USA.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. The New York Times recently gave I think it was the New York Times had an article saying, I've been posting in response to like Macron and different people like that on Twitter, where it basically says that the G7 is
I have it. The unloved leaders. Yeah. This says it all for me.
That's
although, of course, New York Times are sympathetic to the G7. Still, their headline was like, it was pretty based, as in based in reality. Have a look. From yesterday.
It doubles as a club for unloved leaders, which is true. Like you look at, Macron, Schultz, Trudeau in particular, Biden definitely, and there's no love in those prime ministers or presidents' home countries for them, amongst them, probably majority of the people. So they're all there trying to make themselves feel like popular and powerful. But it's pretty, it definitely has lost a lot of luster, the G7 as it is today. And
so well, that's probably last word in Bakhmut.
What else was going on in Russia or in Ukraine this week?
John Helmer described it in the end as cynical trading in horseflesh, which is an apt description. Cynical trading in flesh, period. And of course, it's mostly Ukrainian flesh, not Russian. So, Bakhmut. Do you want to return to the missiles thing? Because we talked about it last week, but no one else.
It hadn't happened though.
No one else really.
Had it happened by then?
Well, you had the detonations of the ammo dumps in Western Ukraine,
but not the.
Oh yes. So okay. Update. So against the background of the Western media narrative, Russia is running out of missiles, right? You've heard that since March of last year. On last Monday night, Russian airstrikes, they said 18 altogether, hit sites in Ukraine. including, oh yes, this was new since the last show, the Kinzhals strike that destroyed a US Patriot system in Kiev. Do you want to play that video? This is CCTV footage. Y'all probably seen it, but what you probably don't know about it is that it's highly illegal in Ukraine to upload such footage. We know that because you since discovered that the 6 Ukrainian bloggers have been arrested for sharing this video, possibly uploading. I don't know. I don't know who had it originally. So this is Kiev last Monday night. Watching air defense system presumed to be the Patriot system fire off. Well, I don't know. Some people counted this tweeter here counted 30 launches here. They don't come from the exact same spot. We checked online, and the Patriot battery typically holds 4. Appears to anyway from published photos of it. So there are multiple launchers in slightly different locations.
Well, we don't know if they're all Patriots either, you know what I mean? Of course. So,
Yeah.
but, you know, it's possible there were at least a few of those references to, like, 3 of them at least, 3 Patriot systems being used. The location is kind of behind, it seems to be, it's in the area, in the compound of the Kiev airport, which is a...
you can see that there's definitely different locations off to your left.
Of course,
now.
yeah. So it's in the location of the Kiev airport, which is a good place to put it, obviously, because you've got an open area. You know, there's no buildings around an airport, no big buildings. It's a wide area, and it gives you a clear view of the kind of sky and that kind of stuff. And you know, you're away from buildings basically, which is an obvious place to put it. And it's not just protecting the airport, obviously, because it has quite a wide range. But it's just one of many Patriot. These would be one of many Patriot systems that are in Ukraine that are, you know, theorized or assumed to be in Ukraine. Most of them in Western Ukraine. But it kind of, last week we were talking about the shoot down of the 2 helicopters and the 2 jets over Russia. And I suggested at the time that it was probably a Patriot system that actually took those four things down.
Before you go on, you notice there's a break. This is a little, I think it's 6 minutes later in real time.
Right.
The launches have stopped. There's something else. Flash.
Yeah. So it all kind of makes sense. You know, obviously nobody's talking about it. The Russians aren't talking about it. The Ukrainians definitely aren't talking about it. The West is downplaying it. But you know, to the extent that we can get information on it, it seems to me like, and I said at the time when that happened, was that it kind of bore out my suggestion about the shoot down of the 2 helicopters and the 2 jets over Russia, just 3 or 4 days previously, that they were shot down by a Patriot system, and this was Russia's response to that by targeting a Patriot system in Ukraine.
Right.
As a response, basically, and you know, putting the Americans on notice that, you know, there'd be a response. And the thing about it is that the question is why did they fire so many missiles all at once? Well, I mean, the standard way of identifying air defense systems is to provoke them to fire, so you can get kind of geolocate them, or you can ID their location for an actual strike on the system. You know, so often you'd either send in a lot of drones or some what do you call them? Decoy missiles.
Apparently, I've learned that the Kinzhal itself
can be
has decoys that split off.
Right, yeah. But it's also possible to spoof radars as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
We learned that from Iran.
Yeah, exactly. You can spoof the radar to show a bunch of incoming missiles, whatever, when there are none, and provoke it to, you know, the air defense system to fire off. And then you get an idea of where it is, because the easiest way to identify it is when it actually launches missiles. And then, as you saw, six minutes later is a kind of reasonable time frame as well for them to have identified from those launches of the location of these air defense systems, and then target it with a hypersonic missile.
Yeah.
So it's not really strange, you know, in that sense.
Right. But what you've deduced, that scenario you've deduced, is far from anything anyone is reporting or talking about.
I know, yeah.
We're miles off. We noticed last Monday. We went to one of our favourite sites immediately to see how they covered it, The Telegraph. Like, we don't have it to hand, but it basically said the exact opposite. It said, Ukraine shoots down all Kinzhals with Patriots, victory, next to a photo showing fire services putting out a fire in some massive blaze, presumably the site that was hit with the Patriot. And then, of course, Anglophone media updated the story from all 6 Kinzhals shot down Monday to Tuesday. Yes, a Patriot system appears to have been damaged. Is that it? Is that it, guys?
Just from falling debris, you know.
Oh, that's right. That's what the story said.
Falling like from the shot down Kinzhal missiles. Obviously, they shot them down very close to the point that the remains of the Russian hypersonic missiles fell on the Patriot batteries and damaged them. Yeah, I mean,
okay. So by Wednesday, this is the kind of op-ed the Telegraph was putting out. Remember this guy, the copium is off the charts here. But it's been an ongoing narrative now for 2 weeks, Patriots versus Kinzhals, you know, ever since they had Klitschko appear with what obviously wasn't a Kinzhal. Headline, it's an op-ed, but still, American Patriots nailed Putin's hypersonic Kinzhal missile. The world has changed. Yeah. Xi Jinping will be annoyed by this as well. And let's read a few paragraphs. It's totally off the charts copium. So this is last Tuesday or Wednesday. There's much excitement around the world following the events of Monday night, in which Ukrainian air defenses, armed with US-made weapons, reportedly, keyword, neutralized a heavy Russian missile attack against Kiev. In particular, the attack apparently included 6 Kinzhal Dagger air-launched missiles, which are often described as hypersonic, frequently with the added assertion that there is no defense against such weapons. Rubbish. All 6 reportedly stopped by US Patriot, blah, 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 although a Patriot installation was apparently damaged, perhaps by debris from a downed Russian weapon.
Yep.
What a coincidence. It's bonkers. I mean, 4th paragraph. So, is the world different today? Can any nation in possession of Patriots or similar interceptors rest easy, unworried by the thought of hypersonic weapons, perhaps even hypersonic nuclear weapons, in enemy hands? At least he equivocates here. The answer is yes and no. This is bullshit, though.
Is that guy, my first question, is that guy getting paid by...
Raytheon?
Yeah, getting paid by... Raytheon, yeah. Is he getting paid by Raytheon? Because, I mean, that's straight out of, like, that would be straight out of... He could take sections of it.
Yeah, the brochure.
His brochure on Patriot missiles and send it around. So is he getting paid for it? Because certainly Raytheon's got a lot of skin in the game in the sense of that message going around the world, the Patriot system. Because
otherwise they're rendered useless.
Well, it's one of the most...
the market falls off a cliff.
Yeah, of course. It's one of the most exported, or perhaps the most exported to partners, to other countries around the world, the most exported air defense system that the US has, you know, that it sells, that Raytheon sells basically and makes a lot of money from. So, of course, you're going to get as many people as possible in the Western media to talk it up. And, of course, he's saying the world has changed and everybody's excited, and he puts on the Telegraph is making money out of it as well. So everybody's making money out of this. That's their primary focus, is making money from this war. And anybody who thinks that there's some bleeding hearts involved or, you know, genuine concern for Ukraine is massively deluded. And, you know, people like that can stay in la la land. So they can stay in make-believe unicorn land, you know, if they want. But it's not a good place to be, because there's an actual reality going on beyond that is much more concrete and has much more, obviously, is the one that actually, you know, has real world effects on everyone, including the people who are indulging this massive delusion, including this guy. And I don't know if that guy believes it himself, people who write that, the hacks in Western media outlets who write that stuff, do they believe it themselves, or are they simply doing it because
they'll get a check today?
Yeah, they'll get their money.
Is there interest as long as just the end of the day? You know? Yeah. In any event, there we have a historic first, a Russian weapon bested.
Supposedly.
a US one. But it's reported, the first thing you hear about it in the West is that it's the opposite. The opposite happened. No. An American weapon bested the best of the Russians. So, yeah. And then they complain that people live in alternate realities. Well, you keep manufacturing them.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happened next? Okay, about our conclusion last week, right, that NATO forces, coming back to reality, if a Patriot system was hit, were recently conscripted Ukrainians operating?
Absolutely not, no.
No.
They might have been standing there going, oh, and then you do what? But obviously it's Americans and Germans, because the Germans have supplied a couple of Patriot, a few Patriot systems to, obviously they're American, but they were from Germany to, owned by Germany, given to Ukraine, and the Americans themselves have provided several. So they're all being staffed and, you know, run by American and German personnel. So if there were any there, that if those were Patriot, if there were a few Patriot missile batteries at the Kiev airport that, you know, supposedly intercepted the Kinzhals missile from Russia, but didn't, and actually probably got hit. One of them got hit at least, and maybe others damaged. Then it's possible that some American and German personnel were killed or injured in that. You know,
I found one outlet that followed through the most logical conclusion to report that. Don't know much about it. MilitaryWatchMagazine.com. Headline here. From yesterday, Russian hypersonic strikes on Ukraine's new Patriot missiles likely cause mercenary casualties, i.e. NATO personnel. And basically they have the same analysis we had last week. But that's it. One. Maybe Duran guys have mentioned this, but it's like begging an explanation. Like, do you know how complex... What the picture there? Okay, so they have a composite image. On the left, you see the actual missile launcher battery. On the right, you have a Russian MiG, I think, with a one Kinzhal under it. Well, the Patriot's a lot more complex than that. There's like 4 or 5 vehicles that must be used. There's a radar system. There's its own power source, like a generator. There's... Well, we saw how many launches there were. There were obviously multiple batteries. There's no way Ukrainians were operating those things. It's highly complex. It's like, and there's 2 other vehicles, I think, that are involved. So, other than that, you found that actually that CNN was cited by this Ukraine Maps Twitter account. Possible oblique reference to Russian success, so to speak, as opposed to a Ukrainian success in downing Kinzhals that night. This is CNN. Again, how are people going to notice this? I had to search for this. Like, it's buried in an article that's ostensibly about... It's moving on. The article headline is about the F-16s. So the topic's already moved on. So when are we giving them fighter jets? You know?
Yeah.
So
let's move on.
Headline is... from May 19th, so Friday, U.S. signals to allies it won't block their export of F-16 jets to Ukraine. Okay, so this is the next contrivance. How many jets are we giving them and when? But if you go do a search for defense officials, it's buried way down. This reference to the Kinzhal versus Patriot incident last week. Probably the next one. Yeah, here it is. It's under this subheading. Okay, there it is. The 4th paragraph under that heading. Defense officials and congressional staffers told CNN that Ukrainian troops have in recent weeks used the U.S. Patriot air defense system to shoot down at least one faraway Russian fighter jet. Is that a reference to last Saturday shooting the jets and the choppers in Russia? But that's it. Literally that sentence, because the rest is disinformation, misinformation. Next paragraph, we don't know that, but they claim that the Russian planes in question
Run a bombing run to fire missiles against. Yep.
So it was defensive, blah, blah, blah. And then they quickly restate the mantra in the next paragraph. These anonymous U.S. defense officials said the Ukrainians were responsible for making their own firing decisions.
Yeah, right.
once the West provided the Patriot systems.
Sure. They're not even trained on them. Takes a lot longer to train.
That's it. That's the only oblique reference to mentioning that night at all in the entire Western media. CNN, buried paragraph, and that small military watch website.
Yeah. But just before so we can move on from Ukraine, but like in terms of Bakhmut, Bakhmut has fallen, big deal. What people need to keep in mind, and I know it's hard to keep it in mind all the time, but because for some reason, maybe Hollywood or people's general understanding of how war works from previous wars is that it's all about, taking an invading army, let's say, taking as much land as possible, running rampant across the country and running to the capital, getting rid of the leadership and installing a new government, and it's all done. That's what the narrative has been from the beginning of this conflict. That's what Russia was trying to do, but obviously that's not actually in practice how wars generally play out. Wars play out when two opposing armies fight with each other, and when one of them has no more soldiers left, then the other one wins. So it's not how much land Russia has or hasn't taken is really insignificant compared to the amount of Ukrainian soldiers that are being killed and the amount of Ukrainian military material that is being destroyed. And once there is a limit to that, obviously there's a limit to the number of soldiers that are available to Ukraine. Like something like 8 million people outside the country. There's only about 25, let's say, million people available in the country, and what percentage of those are able-bodied males who are willing to go and fight, and they can push into a fight, they can train them and all that kind of stuff. I guess there is an end to this in that sense, where you have no more Ukrainian soldiers, or not enough Ukrainian soldiers to mount any kind of a defense, and then it's over, right? And of course, behind all this as well is this is just one part of it, as Putin and Xi have been pretty explicit about in terms of their overall vision, that it's, particularly Russia's overall vision of a multipolar world. This conflict in Ukraine is largely a sideshow to what's going on globally, and the only reason this Ukraine conflict is continuing is because the West is willing and able to continue to support Ukraine, to funnel weapons and to allow them to keep fighting, because without Western support, the war would be over in tomorrow.
Like Borrell himself said last week.
Yeah. So if other factors relating to the emergence of a multipolar world and the unseating of America as the kind of hegemon in this definitive division of the world into two hemispheres, if that happens, then you can bet that Ukraine will very, very quickly disappear as
the current thing,
as a current thing, and there'll be no more Western supply of weapons and rah-rahing and slavy Ukraine about Ukraine, and Ukraine will fall. So it's either Russia gets to the point where it has attrited enough of the Ukrainian military that they can't really fight anymore, and then it's over, or other factors, other major global factors come into play, and major changes happen, which gives the West something more important to be worried about than Ukraine, and they stop supporting Ukraine, and then the war's over that way. So you have to keep the bigger picture in mind all the time,
Yeah.
Which is the perspective. Well, they've said it. That's the perspective of Putin and Xi and other partners that see other countries that see things the same way. That's what they're looking to. They're looking at the big picture and a change in the global order. And obviously, that downstream of that, there are massive changes in all sorts of things. One of them being the Ukraine conflict.
I recall Putin saying in the months leading up to it, maybe late 2021, Russia needs more land like a hole in the head. Pretty much, that's verbatim, I think.
Yeah.
And it comes back to, well, then what is his purpose? I think he stated it at the outset, and it remains it. The denazification part is a bit more abstract. Who's a Nazi? When has been a...
Well, they say denazification, they just mean the
demilitarization
destruction of the
is functional.
Yeah. They put
achievable. Yeah. That's what they're committed to.
Yeah.
Of course, the West has responded to that by going, well, let's keep militarizing Ukraine. We'll just keep sending it in.
We'll be their military until we couldn't be bothered anymore. Yeah, so Bakhmut falls. it's a, it was a stronghold. It was very heavily fortified and that kind of stuff. So it is significant in that respect. But there's other cities not far from there, from Bakhmut, west of Bakhmut, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk to the northeast type thing would be two fairly major cities similar to Bakhmut. So in theory, and there are others, Druvishka and Konstantinivka and Chasiv Yar, there's all the little towns there, but they're not as heavily fortified as Bakhmut was. So if the Russians were decided to keep pushing on further eastwards, because ultimately, there is a line there of the actual line of the Donetsk People's Republic, or not the Donetsk People's Republic, but the Donetsk region, and on the other three regions that Russia has incorporated into the Russian Federation. I mean, those obviously are lines where or goals that the Russians would have in mind from a practical day-to-day planning point of view that they want to hold and control. So just look at the map of those four regions and you can assume that as the war continues, that Russia will be planning to liberate, quote unquote, those four regions and basically take those four regions fully militarily. At that point, if they're able to do that, the amount of conflict and fighting with the Ukrainian military involved, implies a lot more Ukrainian soldiers dying and a lot more Ukrainian military equipment being destroyed. You know what I mean? So you could get to the point where those four regions that they declared as part of the Russian Federation, that declared independence or declared that they're unifying with Russia, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. If you get to the point where those four are occupied by the Russian military, you may actually also be in a situation where there's more or less no more Ukrainian military. At which point, Russia might say, special military operation
Maybe.
over.
McGregor says they won't stop till they take Kharkiv and Odessa. That's his minimal, because they were historically Russian cities.
Yeah,
that's if Russia has this positivist goal, this conquesting thing in mind. But if they're true to their intent at the beginning, which is demilitarization, then it's probably more functional in nature. Is there another stronghold fortification line from Kramatorsk to Slavyansk, for example? Then that's next. And we'll dig in there as long as they're digging in, ascending, and when that falls, it's demilitarized to another extent, and so on. Yeah,
if you get to the point where, like I said, the demilitarization actually happens, and there's not enough Ukrainian military left, they can take whatever they want.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like this idea that they're not going to stop until they get to the Dnieper. They're going to take Kharkiv and Odessa and all this kind of stuff. I mean, that implies a very long conflict if you assume that it will continue on the way it has been. Like
city by city, street by street.
They spent 8 months getting Bakhmut, and there's another if you include them all in that region over to the Dnieper River, there's another 20 major cities. So 20 times 8 months, what is that? That's like another 15 years to carry on the way they've been going. No, of course, if it gets to the point where it can drop off a cliff very quickly, where the Ukrainian military effectively collapses because they have no longer have a fighting military capability, well then when that happens, you can go wherever you want. Yeah. To a large extent. You can go all the way to the Dnieper. You can walk into Kharkiv without any opposition.
All the way to Berlin.
You can go all the way to Berlin, which is, absolutely, yeah. Because
there's nothing left.
Because Germany's given all its weapons to Ukraine. And the Germans are too busy Vorsprungen durch Techniken in their factories to be bothered fighting. What are we going to say?
Do you want to comment on this radiation cloud rumor following the Khmelnytsky massive detonations we saw last week? Claims and counterclaims. Maybe there was a spike briefly, but it didn't appear to be much above background radiation, a spike in gamma radiation. But as people have been pointing out, depleted uranium shell, that isn't the form of radiation that it releases. No. Its main threat is heavy metal toxicity.
Right. In the local area, yeah.
But it's not good either way. They shouldn't be used in war. The Russians have them. I don't think they've been using them, though. Anyway.
The other thing,
I don't. Yeah.
yeah, we can leave Russia. We can leave the Ukraine conflict there. I think there's not much more to say about it, just than what we've said. But this week also last week we talked about the CIA being exposed as being directly involved in covering up the Hunter Biden laptop story and pretending it was a Russian disinfo campaign and covering up damaging information about the Biden family. And this was in the summer of 2020, which very possibly would have led to Biden not winning the presidency. So you have evidence that clear evidence that the CIA directly interfered in the American democratic process in favor of one candidate over another. And this week you had John Durham, who was we talked about this counsel, Department of Justice counsel, who was was a golden boy for both parties. There was no partisanship with him at all, no question of partisanship. He was appointed by the DOJ to investigate.
By Bill Barr,
right,
who was no fan of Trump's.
Right. To investigate the FBI basically in what they were doing in 2016 with the Clinton campaign and whether or not they basically made up bogus, phony allegations about Trump, about Russiagate basically. Putin colluding with the Russians, Putin with Russian hookers on a bed Obama slept in, and the Steele report and all that stuff that was hand in hand, the FBI hand in hand with the Clinton campaign Clinton and the DNC to smear Donald Trump and to in that way interfere in the election and to obviously smear Russia and demonize Russia. And it's all of a piece in a certain sense if you can see how it led to a war with Ukraine. You can see the track they were all on, demonizing Trump and demonizing Russia at the same time, and then you have a war with Russia. It's not rocket science what was going on here. But what's interesting is it's kind of crickets in a certain sense,
Yeah.
CNN
300-page report, 4 years in the making.
Yeah, basically saying that the FBI engaged in partisan politics and made up stories and had no reason whatsoever to investigate, had no evidence whatsoever to investigate Trump for any kind of Russian collusion. There was no evidence for that, so they should have never been an investigation. And all of the stuff that the public got about Trump being a Russian asset, blah, blah, was all based on that, and it was all of a piece, and it was all lies. So they directly interfered, and so you have an intelocracy basically in America, where the overt politicians don't actually play second fiddle to the intel agencies. The intel agencies decide domestically and domestic policy and foreign policy. They're the ones who rule and call the shots, and they're all unelected. They're appointed by governments, but they're it's like I'm the boss and I pretend that you're the boss and then give you instructions to appoint me to be the boss of the intel agency, which is actually the one that runs the show and tells you what to do, gives you briefings every day to tell you what to say and what to think, and reminds you that I have 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you
if you don't follow my
if you
orders.
don't do what I say, because I'm the top dog in this country basically, up to and including killing you, or if I need to. So, but what I saw this, it was like
There's been very little coverage.
There's been very little coverage on, and the coverage that has been, it's been so scurrilous. If you get here, check this out. This is CNN analysis, right? And in response to the Durham report, right, exposure, like unequivocal evidence in Durham's report that the FBI colluded with the Democrats in the Clinton campaign to screw over Donald Trump and Russia and spread lies to the American public and interfere in the election. And this is their headline: Trump weaponizes FBI Russia report he demanded to keep fighting the election that never ends. But
he didn't demand it.
No.
Bill Barr did.
Exactly.
Bill Barr does not like Trump.
And of course they try to tie it to him fighting the election.
The election that never ends, because CNN won't bloody stop talking about it and hasn't stopped talking about it since 2016.
But check out, just do a search for those debates. This just got made me just, I wanted to wring someone's neck. Ideally the person who wrote this. Those debates, this guy's summation of what's actually going on here. Mm-hmm. Those debates aside, the polarization of American politics, everything involving Trump and the bitter aftermath of the 2016 election, means that perceptions of links between his team and Russia will depend for many citizens on their ideological perspective and their opinion of Trump.
all of which were shaped by CNN.
Exactly. So no responsibility whatsoever. Like, talk about like weasel words and
Yeah.
like manipulative bullshit from this guy. Like, and but this is what he believes. Like, I mean, again, talk about a complete absence of any honesty or any integrity whatsoever on the part of this person. Like, he's just talking about a report that he cannot disagree with, that is unequivocal in its in the evidence that the FBI colluded effectively with the DNC and the Clinton campaign to lie about Trump, and they had a field day when it was happening.
Yeah.
To repeat those lies from the FBI over and over again to the American public, and then he turns around and blames the American public for believing his lies. Well, it'll just depend. It's just people's opinions, you know. And I have nothing to do. We at CNN have nothing to do with the perception that the American people have of Trump and whether or not he was involved with Russia. It's nothing to do with us. We just like 24/7 repeated that Trump was colluding with Russia based on lies that I'm now talking about and now kind of tacitly admitting that those were lies. But I have no responsibility for spreading those lies at the time or any effect they might have on the public perception of Trump and Russia. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and people wonder, like, you know, why we sit here and analyze this stuff ourselves, because there is no truth whatsoever. Like, for 90% of what passes for media and information sharing in the Western world via whatever means, 90% of it, there's no truth in it whatsoever.
Yeah. The only defense you might muster up for CNN's distancing of, well, no, this was a macro social phenomenon that we're just reporting, you know, from the outside. The only defense they could muster is that, well, we were just reporting what the intelocracy told us.
Yeah, and you never questioned them?
Which is true. You were just repeating the lies, so...
Yeah. But had you scratched the surface, maybe as an actual journalist who is meant to do a bit of research and stuff and figure out whether or not what you're being told is true or not, if you had scratched the surface, you would have quickly seen that there were serious problems with these claims, and then you could have reported that. But no, you didn't. You don't do anything. You don't have a job to do. You're basically a mouthpiece for the intel agencies. Your job is to be a mouthpiece for what intel agencies in America say, and they are clearly biased.
Yeah. It's either for money or they're scared. You remember what we heard Tucker Carlson say to Tulsi Gabbard, that he had been on the phone with the head of the House Committee on Intelligence Oversight, or so that was his job, you know, to check in with the intel agencies, not just to get the briefings from them, but to actually provide oversight on what they're doing. He said, Tucker, I can't continue to talk with you or text you about this. Let's meet. Well, why? Because the NSA is reading and intercepting my stuff. Of course, everyone knows that. Duh. So let's meet, you know, in person.
Yeah, he's like, I don't believe what I'm just telling you what they told me, and I can't really publicly
We can't
say
discuss this here.
I can't publicly say I don't agree with the intel agencies.
I can't even privately say it to you.
Well, maybe in the woods somewhere, you know, but you never know. Even
Or on the
then.
golf course, even then, right? So Matt Gaetz wants indictments.
No chance. Not
No
going to
chance.
happen.
I know, but bless them. They're trying. Him and Jim Jordan, they give some great press briefings on this. But Musk himself spoke up about it as well. Did Musk say Biden should be impeached over this?
Don't know.
I heard that's what was being reported. I never actually checked that he tweeted or said it to that effect. Yeah, I know. And then there's this, like, Obama, is he being facetious here? Is he being manipulative? Or does he genuinely believe? He's passing comment here last week in an interview with CBS News. Headline says it all, really. Obama grapples with America's different realities. How can we have a common set of facts?
Common set of facts. Not your facts and my facts, but facts. You know.
Interlocracy. That's how.
Yeah.
If you believe that fantasy vision then of the world, the two shall never meet kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then from his perspective, he's like, this conservative, what is wrong with them? You know, we saw that earlier on years ago. Alternate facts and alternate realities that they have, the other side, you know.
Here's, And of course, these people, you have to start questioning what's actually going on. And obviously, you have to start questioning what they say and what they're really up to, and whether they believe anything they say. That's the problem. It's not about it's not about believing the media's, whether or not you should believe the media's slant on any given event or whatever, or the media distortion or whatever of what they're talking about. But it's about politicians themselves and what they say. You have to question whether or not they actually believe what they're saying, or whether they're saying it for some other reason. This is Rishi Sunak at the G7, that meeting for unpopular, unloved leaders in the West. Have a listen.
G7 also demonstrated unity of purpose on China. China poses the biggest challenge of our age to global security and prosperity. They are increasingly authoritarian at home and assertive abroad. And as the G7 have showed, the UK's response is completely aligned with our allies.
So, are you going to go to war with China now, or are you not? It sounds like you're getting belligerent with China, and you're going to push back and maybe start sanctioning China the way you sanctioned Russia, and threatening China, and then leading up to a war with China over Taiwan. Is that what you're going to do? I don't think so, because the entire economy of the entire world would collapse overnight if you had any kind of a serious kind of like fighting war with China. So that's not going to happen.
Even just a sanctions war.
Yeah. Well, they destroy themselves through a sanctions war, basically. So I don't believe anything he says, and it's like at a very basic level, that guy has to get up there and sound important. Sound like he's dealing like with other people of his ilk, have to get up there and sound like they're dealing with big major issues that are of global importance. Because what else? What's the point? You're a prime minister. That's what you're meant to do, right? You have to sound like you're an important person who's dealing with major issues, and you have to sound like you're strong and stable leadership in a crisis. Blah 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 blah. When what you're actually going to do and what's actually happening behind the scenes is completely different.
I think a question to ask first, in order to answer that, is: do Rishi and friends believe that the sanctions war against Russia has worked?
Right.
I've seen a lot of commentary that it just worked excellently. Now we're ready to move on to China.
Right. But again,
we have proof of concept. It worked.
But there's even a deception in that, because we know that, and they know that the sanctions against China, against Russia, for example, against Russian oil,
have all been
are being actively circumvented with their connivance.
Yeah.
I.e. by European countries, by simply a wink and a nod or a memo or a request to Turkey or to Egypt or to Morocco to buy shitloads of Russian oil, rub out the Russian oil logo on it, stamp Egyptian oil on it, and we'll buy it from you, because we need a lot of oil. We need Russia's oil. Like, we just don't want to buy it. We don't want to be seen to buy Russian oil.
To be seen.
Is there any way we
perception?
Can get, how can we? So, and then he says that sanctions are working, even though he knows that he's buying Russian oil through Egypt or Morocco under a different name, and paying a higher price for it, and passing that price on to British citizens, or French citizens, or Spanish citizens, which is what they're all doing. And yet he'll say that sanctions against Russia are working when he knows they're not.
Yeah.
Because he's actually facilitating them to not work by continuing to buy Russian commodities. And the things we can't really, things we can do away with, things we don't need from Russia, we'll not buy those. But Russia just sells them to countries further east. And the main income for Russia, obviously, is fossil fuels,
Yeah.
And everybody's still buying those. Nothing has changed. Because if everybody in the world, or if, as they claim, Russian sanctions are working, we've got us and the whole rest of the world to stop buying Russian oil, and that's why it's hitting Russia so hard, because they're down to zero. Well, why hasn't Russia collapsed? And more to the point, why haven't you collapsed? Because you can't just switch off Russian oil and gas, because the world is dependent on it. A large part of the world is dependent on it. You can't just switch it off. That takes a massive chunk of the energy supply out of the world market, and then some countries somewhere have to be failing.
Yeah.
Including Russia, but they're not. So what are you talking about?
Yeah. Empire
So
of
it's
lies.
like they think people don't know this, and maybe most people don't, but it's ridiculous to, I don't know. Anyway.
So, as has become customary, at the same time that the G7 is held, the Bilderberg conference
Lovely.
takes
Bilderberg.
place.
It's Alex Jones.
Same
isn't it?
weekend. It must be I don't know what the wink and a nod. We put the puppets over here, and the puppet masters will all meet over here, right?
Right.
In Lisbon this year. Well, they're kind of more open about it these days. Bilderbergmeetings.org puts out a press release of the participants and the topics. I think this is the topics page. Let's see what they're talking about this year. What can we expect in the next year from our dear masters of the universe? The key topics for discussion this year are AI, banking system, China, energy transition, Europe, that's big, fiscal challenges, that's vague, India, even bigger, industrial policy and trade, vague, NATO, too big, Russia, very big, transnational threats, vague, Ukraine, good. They're still talking about Ukraine anyway. They haven't lost interest in Ukraine yet. And US leadership. US leadership. As in, who's the president or leadership of the world? Yeah, so no real tell there. Some years you can get something and go, hang on, did they say global cooling? Remember that one, 2014?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So that's what they're up to, yeah.
it's the usual funny stuff. It's kind of the
People
usual
are-
suspects. It's basically all Western. There's one Turkish journalist there, and otherwise they're all European or North American or Anglophone. Dutch Prime Minister's there. We know that because they filmed him going in. A few other leaders, but it's mostly like journalists and
Useless people.
no, important people, Joe.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Don't diss them like that. They're powerful. This is another milestone. After 13 years not being in the Arab League, President Assad landed in Riyadh and gave a speech. We won't listen to the whole thing, but we'll start watching this. It's funny what they did. They made this Syrian journalist / blogger took the video that was published by the Arab League conference as a preliminary to his speech. There's some flashbacks.
He must go.
Assad needs to go.
Assad must go.
Assad must go.
Assad must go.
We are still saying Assad has to go.
Assad has to go.
Assad has to go, and I'm confident that Assad will go.
Assad must ultimately go.
Our position on Assad has not changed, that he must go.
Assad must go.
Assad must go.
Assad should go. Assad will still have to go.
Assad is a war criminal and should go.
Assad is on his way out.
Bashar al-Assad is finished.
Our goal and focus remains an end to Assad's rule.
Say, well, what do you want us to do about Assad? Take him out? Well, how are we going to do that?
By fighting Assad, who turned out to be a lot tougher than she thought, and now she's going to say, oh, he loves Assad. He's just much tougher and much smarter than her and Obama.
Good man, Trump.
He's tougher and smarter than you two.
Yeah, this is him arriving in Riyadh.
Where Zelensky was as well.
Oh, yeah, that was weird. Didn't expect
Sort
him
of
to show
berating everybody about not being Slavo-Ukrainian enough. Did they play that music while he was walking?
No.
Casey, he's like
That's MBS, of course.
That's MBS, and MBS is like, hey, it was nothing personal, you know,
Yeah,
it's just
no.
business. We're all friends, you know. We try to get rid of you, but you know, now that things have changed, you know, politics is fickle. We're all full of shit, basically. We change. We change our opinions and our policies as often as we change our underwear, and since we don't wear any underwear under those.
المملكة العربية السعودية أصحاب الجلالة والسيادة.
I'll summarize the speech. We won't listen. It's 5 minutes long.
So, like, all those Americans were like, if we just say that enough times, Assad must go, then eventually
Then
he'll
we'll
magically
make
go.
reality happen. That's the wishful thinking.
It's
of the
like you
West.
say the Hail Mary backwards into the mirror at 12 o'clock, the devil will appear.
There's something ritualistic about the way they go about things. The ruble will collapse. It will. And we get enough people to say, well, there is some bite to it because, you know, if you change perceptions, you can have a shift happen among Russian people, for example. They're trying to break that cohesion, which will have knock-on
Propaganda.
effects. I'll summarize the speech, though. He basically addressed the point you said, you know, without bitching about anyone in the room. It was a speech of reconciliation and peace. But he said, what we need to learn from what I've learned from this is that you can have relationships with countries and alliances and so on, but they're fickle. They come and go. You know, the only thing that remains solid as far as the medium he was speaking in are concerned is we're still here. We're still Arab countries. We have to remain neighbors with each other.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And we badly need to unite because the only way we're going to withstand aggression from without, i.e. from the West, is if we're united.
And I think they're all getting that memo, basically. And especially, I think, since, you know, Russia's actions over the past, you know, 5 or 6 years, particularly when it beginning in Syria, has, you know, increased Russia's reputation and its credibility among those people in terms of its ability to
put out a fire
yeah.
and move itself out of the way then.
Yeah.
It doesn't park itself there for 6 years and steal the oil from bloody oil fields.
Right, and to push back against the US and US machinations in the Middle East and to provide a certain level of protection for Middle Eastern countries that want to be a bit more sovereign than they have been under American hegemony. So I think that's making a big difference. It's basically the reason Assad was welcomed there in Saudi and would give that speech and all that kind of stuff is entirely down to Russia.
Yeah.
And the Americans are livid, but tough shit. Suck it up.
And Zelensky was there. Is he like literally unable to return to Kiev these days?
Well, I don't know. He might have been afraid that you know, it just coincides with, you know, these meetings, or he was around. He was in Europe when the drones attacked the Kremlin.
Yeah,
and
I think he might have returned briefly.
He returned briefly, then he was away again whenever there was the attack on the Patriot missile system, when there was a shoot down of the 4 planes over Russia, when there was the responding attack against the Patriot system in Kiev, and then the fall of Bakhmut. He's out for all of that because, you know, CIA analysts have gamed the whole scenario and said that, yeah, these might be particularly dangerous times for you to be in the country, so why don't you come over and hang out and go down to Saudi Arabia there and give shit to the Arabs, tell them to say Slava Ukraini more.
Yeah.
Try and get them
give them a message from us.
It'll be hard, but try and get them to pronounce Slava Ukraini. You know, it's hard for the Arabic accent, but try and get them to say Slava Ukraini, and that might work. And then come on over to Japan here, to Hiroshima, and claim that the fall of Bakhmut is worse than Hiroshima, worse than the nukes in Hiroshima. Why don't you do that, and that way you'll keep yourself safe and you'll piss people off.
Yeah.
So
it's meant to win friends, but it's like...
Yeah.
George Soros, is he dead yet?
He should be.
Rumours flying last week he died.
Him and Kissinger.
I believe... He himself spoke and said, rumours about my demise are premature. But yeah, he's going soon. This is unrelated, right?
Kissinger's 100.
He turned 100 this week, did he?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird time. Isn't it?
Him and Soros, like, if there'll be shockwaves around the world when both of them pop their clogs together. Like, who's going to look after us? Who's going to run the world behind the scenes if those two old fogies go, like... Yeah.
Well, Soros has a offspring. Don't know about Kissinger. Probably.
Right.
This caught my eye on RT. US and Israeli envoys clash over Soros. Huh? Apparently, each country has an anti-Semitism envoy. I'm not sure what that means, but anyway, they've taken opposing positions on whether supporters or critics of Jewish financier George Soros is anti-Semitic. The argument kicked off, people probably saw this, when Musk compared Soros to cartoon supervillain Magneto.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically because Soros is like, his reputation is just destructive. Everywhere his money goes, bad stuff happens. Revolutions collapse. Ukraine, for example. Bezos had money in Ukraine since the 1980s. When a commenter responding to Musk on Twitter said, okay, that's not important. Scroll down a bit more. Okay, so Musk was quickly accused of anti-Semitism by ADL CEO Greenblatt, declaring that by comparing Soros to a, quote, Jewish supervillain, Musk would embolden extremists. Well, that's, yeah, you expect him to say that. But this is the next part's unexpected. The Israeli government disagreed. The Israeli government and the vast majority of, they claim, speaking on behalf of Israeli citizens, see Musk as an amazing entrepreneur and a role model, i.e. a good guy. We're on his side. And specifically the Diaspora Affairs Minister in the Israeli government. And she added that criticism of Soros, who finances the most hostile organizations to the Jewish people and the state of Israel, is anything but anti-Semitism, quite the opposite. Well, that's unexpected. When anti-Semitism collide.
Yeah, difficult.
Whose anti-Semitism?
Yeah.
Israel's or rich New York Jews? Not on the same page anymore.
Mm-hmm. The truth is anti-Semitic.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I just saw somebody say that, which is pretty true, about the Trump-Russia collusion business. At this point, the only ones not involved in the Trump-Russia collusion situation was Trump and Russia.
Right. Ukraine was, Clinton was, the Brits were.
All
CIA
the people claiming
was.
it are the ones who were involved in it, and the ones who weren't involved in it were the two people who were claimed to be the actual colluders.
That's
so it's a
why
complete inversion.
Trump and Russia need to collude. They need to team up.
They should start colluding, yeah.
And Musk too.
Yeah.
Musk and Medvedev.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sam Brinton was arrested again.
He was.
At first I thought he'd been arrested for stealing shit again. No, he was arrested for being a fugitive because he didn't respond to a summons or something.
Right.
What a shit show. But that, for me, that perfectly sums it up. Like, let's bring in like a diversity hire to oversee nuclear waste management.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be great. And he's gone. For stealing someone's clothes, wearing her clothes in public, and then getting arrested twice at airports for stealing women's baggage.
Worked out.
Oh, and for me, yeah, I think this is worth mentioning. You remember that skit from Life of Brian where the guys are on the steps of somewhere in ancient Rome and they're having this ridiculous debate because one of them has just announced to the others, I want to be a woman.
Yeah.
That's from 1979, right? Yeah. And, you know, people have commented that you could never do that today, for obvious reasons. Well, John Cleese is currently, apparently, at work in helping to produce a play, a stage version of The Life of Brian.
Right.
And his co-actors are seriously encouraging him to scrap that bit from the play because it would be insensitive. Headline Telegraph, John Cleese urged to scrap Life of Brian joke about man having a baby.
Because men can have babies today and it's not a joke anymore. That's supposedly what's going on, right?
It's just like,
would be seen as offensive.
Yeah, yeah.
To who? to a very, very tiny percentage of the population, while the rest of the vast majority of the population, okay, yeah, that's funny because it's true. That's a good joke. You should keep that in. No, but there's a tiny percent of the population who would be offended by it, i.e. people who like men who want to be a woman. And we should not tell the truth to save their feelings. And it's not just about telling, some hardcore truth, whatever. It's about telling a biological truth. And you're not allowed to say that anymore to protect the sensitivities of people who are way oversensitive.
45 years later, cancelled.
Yeah. State of the world. So anyway, yeah. I think that's about it for this week. Things are just gonna keep going. We'll have to watch. There's gonna be some surprises coming up, but it's a slow grind.
Where? Predict something. Come on, give us
something. I'm predicting some
Taiwan.
Major. No, not this year. I don't think Taiwan. Maybe building up, but I think some environmental.
Climate change.
Some environmental upsets. No, like a big.
Are you one of those XE people?
No, a big volcano or something.
Oh, volcano.
A big rupture somewhere.
Somewhere. It's a big world.
Yeah.
Well, we had a hell of a. I mean, it should have. I don't know how to judge the media coverage of it. I think people just don't know where to put these things when they happen. That earthquake in Turkey just knocked the socks off. Obviously, it was devastating for the region, but because people don't know how to handle it. It doesn't fit into man-made climate change. Right. It's the worst. For perspective now, it beat in terms of death toll the last known large earthquake in modern Turkey. And even then, all the way through the Ottoman records, there's nothing like it. The only equivalent they have for it in scale of destruction and death toll, according to the best records available, are the major earthquake of Antioch, which is a city that no longer exists, Roman ruins now because of that earthquake in 526.
Yeah.
There's no modern anchor on which to place it, so people just go, "Oh my God, that's terrible." Moving on, they almost invite, "Give me another distraction, something else." Because what is it to talk about? It can happen anywhere, and the Turks clearly didn't expect it because it's in a region that isn't normally earthquake prone,
right?
And that's why their buildings were not built to a certain standard.
Yeah, Turkish elections next week, next Sunday, the second round. Will Erdogan survive or not?
He will.
We shall see.
He will. He's up against a liberal who does,
he's up against
that symbol. The international liberal symbol of I care.
I heart everything. It's all about.
It shows I have empathy and I have
everything.
Feelings.
Yeah.
I hate when they do that. Football stars do that, and then politicians started aping it. No. And if you're fooled by that, God help you.
Well, the problem is that the third candidate who got 5% of the vote, he more or less has said people vote for him because he's not in the runoff because he only got 5%.
Yeah,
he said basically vote for Kilkardoglu, whatever his name is, the other guy. So whether or not his voters
will swing
only to him. If he does, that other guy will win. If not, then Erdogan will win. We'll see. It'll be this time next Sunday.
Erdogan needs to get in contact with the Kremlin election fixing services.
Exactly.
Very good. Very good. He worked for Trump in 2016.
He needs to collude with Putin. He needs to collude with Russia.
Well, he kind of has expressly.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, so I think we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching, listening. Hope you enjoyed the show, and thanks for commenting. Any comments going on there on Turkey earthquake? There's a higher population density now than in ancient times, yeah, for sure. Big earthquakes happening these days. If they happen in densely populated areas, it's serious. Anyway, yeah, so thanks for commenting, watching, listening, whatever you're doing. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back next week with another show on whatever's been going on between now and then. So until then, have a good one. See you later.
See you next week. Bye all.
Can't stop the signal now.